A couple of things I was going to chat about tonight, but I don't know. Well, it's tonight for me. It's today for you. I don't know. Do you have any particular areas you're wanting to chat about?
Well, in between our own discussions, we've been bringing up Liz Truss again. So, how's she been doing in the UK?
Well, it's interesting you should mention that. So I looked up, I think she's been in office now about 40 days. I looked it up a couple of days, a day, yesterday I think it was 39 days. So somewhere around there, early 40s. Anyway, I think what I worked out is that she's got another 89 days. If she can survive another 89 days without getting knocked out, she won't be the shortest serving Prime Minister in British history. So if she's knocked out any time in the next sort of, I think it's around 89 days, she will actually end up the shortest serving British Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Apparently, now I'm not British, so I've just been reading, sort of looking from the outside. But apparently, the British have a rule where they'll basically give an incoming prime minister 12 months where they can't call a no confidence motion against them. So that may protect her for a while. However, there seems to be some concern anyway, and despite that rule, it's possible that she may not last much longer.
Oh, everybody was so enthusiastic about this person, right? I mean,
yes, absolutely, exactly. That's right. And I mean, there was some initial excitement where she initially appointed a minister for equalities instead of a minister for equalities and women, and we were really impressed by that. Apparently, she's backed down on that. The feminists sort of really put the thumb screws on, and she's apparently backed down. Oh yeah, that's right. And the minister for equalities, she was going to appoint a man, and we were quite impressed. But then, as you pointed out, there were some other concerning statements that she'd made previously.
Right. Yeah. And these are no small things, right? We discussed the whole anti-catcalling thing, but it's those small things that kind of you let one thing kind of slide through, and then they'll keep on sliding more things through, right?
Exactly, that's right. In fact, the state that I live in Australia is currently criminalising coercive control. And it's only just about to go through the parliament. And obviously, this is going to be something that will be targeted primarily, or actually exclusively, at men. I mean, I'd be really surprised if any women got charged under these these offences at all. Even though there's plenty of research to suggest that women are very likely to use coercive control within relationships. But these laws will be very much targeted at men, unfortunately.
Is it something to do with women in power?
Well, it's interesting. The current Premier of Queensland, where I live, is actually a woman. However, she's previously, when she first came to power, she actually, some people that I know actually managed to get some information to her. And she said she was a little bit surprised about the number of men who were victims of domestic violence. And early on, we had some hope that she was going to actually push the laws back into sort of a more moderate manner and make them more gender neutral. But we're now several years into her term, and that hasn't happened. And now, of course, we've got these coercive control laws. I can't say whether it's her personally, but certainly the direction the government is going is one that really concerns me.
Right. So is there some legal definition of coercive control that I'm not contextualizing properly here? Is it a specific kind of...
Well, there will be. So I haven't researched I haven't researched the specific acts yet, actually. But one thing I did research is the stalking rules in Australia. Stalking laws, sorry, I should say, particularly in Queensland. Now, stalking, of course, is probably something that has been criminalised in many different jurisdictions. Queensland's had anti-stalking laws for a long time, but as you know, I served as a Queensland police officer, and I was aware of the stalking laws when I served as a police officer, and they were quite strict. You had to actually, essentially, there had to be a series of events that occurred, and there had to be something they called, it's been 20 years now, but something they called the Concerning Act, I think, and it had to be something that went beyond merely just, following someone around or staring at them a lot, so stealing underwear off a line, something like that, a criminal act, right?
Sure.
It had to be, you had to prove one of those plus a series of other events, and then you could proceed with stalking, with charging someone with stalking. So I looked at the stalking laws recently. Now, I can't sort of, run them off the top of my head, but I was pretty shocked by how loose they were. It's been 20 years and then since I served as a police officer, and they're very, very loose now. And it seemed like you could pretty much get anybody for stalking if you tried hard enough under these laws. So really, really, as I said, they removed the Concerning Act, which that was really, I think, the protection against the system against railroading somebody. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there had to be, like, for example, something like stealing underwear off a line or something like that, where there had to be an event to go, no, you know what, that's a criminal act and it's also not okay. That's going, that's going beyond just following someone around.
Sure.
So anyway, that's all gone now. And it really looks to me, when I looked at this about a few months ago, that the stalking legislation in Queensland is so loose. Really, if the police wanted to get someone on it, they probably could. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if the coercive control laws are going in similar lines. So this is something that's really concerning to us, something that I will be looking at more thoroughly down the road.
Yeah, definitely. Tell me how that goes.
Yeah. But getting back to Liz Truss, so one area I wanted to talk about was women in power, because this sort of talked about, this is something that had come up. Now, I don't know if you've got any thoughts there about other female rulers that we've seen in Vernon.
Otherwise, I don't have any specific thoughts right now. It's just that we all know the common trope, right? Like, if women were in power, we won't have any wars, we won't have any conflict. Everybody would be, at peace with each other and in harmony. I remember that actress Sally Field or something like that saying something along those lines, and doesn't sound atypical at all, coming from Hollywood types, feminist types. The drill.
Exactly, and it's very much the case. That's right. I've heard that my entire life, as I'm sure we all have. It's interesting, actually, because I often say that nobody was really interested in critiquing gender until feminists came along, and they started critiquing gender. And it's interesting, after I hit the point of too much misandry in society, and I felt that I needed to do something about this, I started doing research into these sort of topics. And really, a lot of the time, I was really shocked by some of the things I found. The public narrative is so different to what the data actually shows. And there's a variety of different ways that that's the case. But even things like whether men or women experience more pain. Anyway, that's another topic. But I found some interesting stuff. And in fact, I actually wrote something in Wiki for Men several years ago, and I'd actually forgotten about it. And I was preparing for tonight, and I came across this, and so I put it back in one of the other articles, which I'm currently working on. So anyway, there was a book written, I think I did want to mention this briefly. It's called Why Leaders Fight. And they did an analysis of world leaders between 1875 and 2004. And only one of the many things they examined was gender. And what they found, this is modern conflicts. They found that about 30% of men and about 36% of women leaders engaged in armed conflict during their time in power, which is actually pretty high in both cases. But it's about 20% higher for women. Now, that's actually consistent with the data that has been found for European monarchs, where European queens regnant, who ran the countries, their countries, they weren't just the wives of kings. They were about that. I think it was somewhere around 30% more likely to engage in wars, start wars, and continue wars. And the thing that I found recently, that I had written in Wiki for Men and made a note of for inclusion in an article some years ago. This was the University of Chicago did this study, and what they found was that women in legislatures, so that's in the context of the US, that would be the Congress, so the House of Representatives and the Senate. Women in legislatures were actually slightly reduced the chance of an armed conflict, but they also found that women in executives increased it, which is consistent with what the other data has shown, that female leaders in executive roles were a bit more likely to start and continue wars. So there seems to be this growing body of evidence that runs entirely counter to this claim that we've heard.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, it seems like it's more, convenient and more fulfilling to blame men for these kind of things, right? Yeah.
Everything, exactly. That's right. with Brexit, there was some female politician. I wasn't really familiar with her, but it's a British politician. And anyway, she said that that if women were in charge, we'd get Brexit done in 5 minutes.
Okay.
Well, Theresa May ended up taking over, and the entire Parliament ended up deadlocked, and it ended up being now I've slipped my mind. The former British Prime Minister, one with the blonde hair, who ended up forcing it through, and getting it done. So yes. Anyway,
yeah,
there we go. As I said, it's the only reason I ever looked at any of this stuff was because I got absolutely sick of all the criticism of men that were in society and all the ways we kept hearing that men were inferior and there was a problem. And when I started looking into a lot of this, I was absolutely shocked at the things I found.
Exactly. Like, you can probably do like a full several seasons of episodes worth of stuff to kind of pick each and every misconception about a female ruler, or like we talked about last time, female inventor. Right? Because was this ruler benevolent? No. Or did she actually invent this thing? Well, not exactly.
Exactly.
Right. So right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth doing a series.
Yes, absolutely. And there are some Wiki for Men pages that I've been putting together over a number of years. Boris Johnson, by the way, was the name that I couldn't recall.
Yeah, right. Yeah, sure.
There are a number of Wiki pages that I'm putting together. I think I may have mentioned, I'm putting a list of 365 male scientists and inventors together. It has to be something related to the STEM field, and it's a hard requirement that their birthday they can only go under the date of their birthday. So I'm currently compiling the list. That's moving along quite nicely. I have to go back and spend a bit of time on that. So many different projects. But there are so many men who have contributed great things to society that I have no doubt that I can pretty easily find one with a birthday for each day of the year, with a significant invention or contribution to science or to a STEM field.
Exactly. Right.
Yes.
Right. So, what else can we go through here today?
So the other area that I wanted to talk about, I said, I don't know if you've got any other areas you're thinking of, but I had a second one that I was looking at.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's currently a very important trial going on here in Australia. Now, this is the trial of Bruce Lerman. Now, I had refrained from stating his name until the trial began. But on the day the trial began, I decided that his name was so much in the public sphere that it really didn't matter anymore. So there are now articles on Wiki for Men which mention his name and so forth, but previously there weren't. Anyway, the trial of Bruce Lerman is ongoing at the moment. It started on the 4th of October. So, what's happened is a woman by the name of Brittany Higgins, who we did briefly talk about just before we started recording. Brittany Higgins' name might be certainly very well known in Australia, might be known overseas. Higgins claimed that Bruce Lerman has raped her, and this was back in 2019 that she alleged the event occurred. She did actually make the allegation back in 2019, but she didn't proceed with the police investigation, was wanting to involve the police. So what happened was, I guess I should probably just give you a quick rundown. She was actually working at this Federal Australian Parliament House in Canberra, which is really probably what's made this one of the things that's made this such a high-profile event. 22nd of March 2019, she was at a work drinks with a number of people from her workplace in Parliament House, her department. Bruce Lerman was there. He worked with her at the time, and there has a disagreement between the two as to exactly why they took the taxi trip that they did, but they took a taxi trip together, and they ended up at Parliament House. Now, Brittany Higgins has said that she just wanted to go home and that she was surprised they ended up at Parliament House. Bruce Lerman has given testimony. It's only just come out, only released in the last few days. He's given testimony saying that that they both had things to do in their workplace in Parliament House, just whatever, something to do after hours. They've gone there, and Bruce Lerman has then said that they basically walked into the office together and then headed in different directions. He went to his office to do a bit of work. That's what his testimony is, and she claims they both went to the minister's office. And Brittany Higgins has then claimed that Bruce Lerman raped her in the office while she was asleep. Bruce Lerman has said that it's been public knowledge for a while that he denied having sex with her, and it's now come out that he denies even, he gave testimony, he denied even being in the same office with her. So he denies even going into the minister's office. But what's happened is that they've both got in a bit of trouble actually for going. Well, they both got into quite a bit of trouble for going into the office after hours. It still seems to be some question whether there really was any legitimate reason for them to both be there. Bruce Lerman's employment was terminated a couple of days later. I think 3 days later from the notes I took, and after his employment was terminated, she went then to a meeting. And it appeared that her employment was going to be terminated. She's then made an accusation that she was raped, and that's, of course, stopped the termination process. There was a brief police involvement, but she decided not to involve the police. But then in 2021, early 2021, it's all gone public, and the police investigation has proceeded. But, of course, this is nearly 2 years after the alleged event. There's no physical evidence at all. The office in which this is alleged to have occurred was cleaned by staff the next day. Now, what's actually happened is he left the building on that night, and then she had remained in the building, and a female security guard went up to, because they knew she was still in the building, and they went up to check on her and found her laying on a couch. Now, her original claim was that she was partly dressed. The female security guard has now given evidence in court saying that she found Brittany Higgins completely naked. So this is completely inconsistent with her original claims. When giving media interviews, Brittany Higgins has claimed that Bruce Lerman removed her underwear. She's now admitted in court that she wasn't wearing any underwear on the night, so he obviously couldn't have removed it, irrespective of what else happened. So there's been a number of inconsistencies in her story. There's actually been a couple of inconsistencies in his story as well. He's given a number of different, 3 different stories as to why he was in the building. At one point he was saying he was just going to drink whiskey and so forth, but another time he claimed, I think in court then he gave the evidence that he was actually going there for a work purpose. But anyway, as I said, the office was cleaned, so any physical evidence that might have been there is long gone. It's been 2 years. It's been several years now. The dress that she was wearing that night, she claimed to have worn it 6 months, only 6 months, kept it in a bag, and then only worn it 6 months later. In actual fact, she's admitted in court that she washed it. She wore it once a few weeks later. The defence presented she initially claimed she'd worn it 6 months later. The defence presented a photograph in court showing a few weeks later that she was wearing the same dress. She washed it. So there's no possibility of any sort of physical evidence. Really, I've been saying for many, many months that if the police don't have some sort of damning secret evidence, then I'd really wonder how this even got to court, because without any physical evidence and without any witnesses, it's really difficult to see how they could meet the necessary standard for a conviction. But anyway, the trial was originally supposed to go 4 to 6 weeks and is now reduced that. They've reduced the number of witnesses. Now, I believe this has been reported as the number of witnesses. I believe this is the number of prosecution witnesses. It was originally 52. Now it's been reduced to 32. So they've let 20 witnesses go. They've shortened the case by a week and a half to 2 weeks. My opinion, now I have no specialised knowledge of this case, just looking at what's going on, just the public sphere, the information is in the public sphere. The case to me looks like it's imploding, prosecution case. It's with the really severe holes in Brittany Higgins' story, with the reduction in the number of witnesses and so forth. Now, and this is something I've stressed from the beginning. I can't say what happened that night. I wasn't there. What I can say is I don't think they can meet the standard necessary for a conviction. I'd be really have to question any conviction unless they've got something that they haven't revealed yet. And then now they're only a few days away from the end of the case. So I think it's looking probably pretty unlikely.
Yeah. This kind of brings up an interesting thought here. Before, during ICMI, we spoke on the subject of false rape accusations during actual sexual activity, right? So I've entertained the thought that we should always be filming, and we should always kind of be able to provide evidence. This is kind of a terrible situation, and we're just saying for the safety of men, we should be actually filming these kinds of things. But in listening to this, now we have to film ourselves not having sex.
Exactly, that's right. That's what's really, I think, very concerning. There's a standard that has to be met to bring a matter before the courts. It's called reasonable prospect of conviction, and I really can't see how they can even meet reasonable prospect of conviction. As I said, unless there's some damning evidence that they haven't revealed yet. But they're only a few days from the end of the trial, and as my understanding is of the process, that any such evidence would have to be given to the defence before the beginning of the trial. So if there is anything, the defence knows about it, and they've decided to proceed. And as said, Bruce Lerman has said not only that he didn't have sex with her, let alone didn't rape her, but he wasn't even in the office. That's his claim.
Right.
That's the testimony he's given.
Right. It's this is our male privilege, right? We have to record ourselves not being in the same room as someone.
Exactly. Absolutely extraordinary, isn't it? It is. Yes. So this is why I say that the MGTOW, for example, get really a lot of shtick, if you like. They get quite a lot of hate for it. And I've said for a long time, and I'm married, you're married, right?
Yes.
But it's entirely rational. They're making an entirely rational decision to we may have not made that decision, but their decision is entirely rational. They've said this is just too dangerous, and we're going to keep that distance from women. And boy, they get a lot of hate for it.
Right, because they're being completely sensible.
Yes.
Nobody in their right mind can blame them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's right. And they really get a lot of hate for it. So anyway, so that's the trial of Brittany Higgins. So they're now saying that the trial may complete as soon as Tuesday, actually, which I guess means only 1 or 2 days more of evidence. Brittany Higgins was absent from the trial for 4 days, which essentially been, it's really interesting. She was giving evidence for the first few days, and then she was absent for 4 days. Now, maybe there may have been a completely legitimate reason for that, but I have to say I was pretty surprised that she was absent from it for a long period of time in the middle of this very serious trial. And the courts put a suppression order on all of the evidence until she had completed her evidence, and she completed her evidence on Friday. So that's why a lot of it has only come out. The media here in Australia has only been able to release a lot of this information. And I've been doing a day-by-day list for the trial. It's not complete yet, but it's going to be a lot shorter. I thought I was committing to a month, 4 to 6 weeks of this, and it's going to be over in a couple of days. So anyway, so that'll be completed, and then we give people a bit of a breakdown of the types of stuff that was discussed day by day. But Wiki for Men also has a timeline of the Brittany Higgins alleged rape, where I talk about some of the major dates in that. So hopefully should be useful for anybody who wants to sort of look at this down the road. So all I'll say is that I hope that justice is done. So
exactly. Now, since we're on the subject of MGTOW, why don't we kind of have like a refresher conversation on why either side, that's the feminist and the more traditionalist right side, why do they hate MGTOW so much? Why are they constantly on their asses just for practicing just their own life direction? Because that's what it boils down to, right?
That's right.
Right.
That's right. I think society doesn't hate anything more than a man who decides to make his own choices. Exactly. Quite frankly, society is very much about male obligation, and that's, to me, a big part of when we talk about the red pill. When you realise that society didn't work the way you thought it worked, it's about realising that men just have this constant expectation on them, which is funny because feminists claim this is the case for women.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I would suggest maybe in some historical societies that was true, but certainly not true today. But absolutely, men still have all these obligations on them, and society is very negative towards men who decide not to to take the traditional route.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, because I remember, Jordan Peterson thing was a big deal at the time. It was circulating around in the men's movement. Paul had a great video reacting to him. I think Karen Strawn did. And we don't know if he really learned his lesson. Actually, I mean, people say he apologized, but it didn't really seem like it's more like a damage control than an apology to me. I don't know. What do you think?
So which incident, because there's one I'm thinking of, but I'm not sure I'm talking, which incident in particular are you thinking of there with Jordan Peterson?
Just calling MGTOW a bunch of pathetic weasels.
Right, sorry. Okay, yeah, okay. I was actually thinking of a different one, right. Yes, I think he showed his own... well, there's something else that was... Hey, yes, I'll get to that. Okay. I thought that he was showing his own inexperience there, where he obviously was being held up as a sort of an authority on a lot of these subjects. And there's no doubt there are subjects on which he is an authority, such as psychology, for example.
Right.
And he certainly has certainly a lot of things he said in terms of I mean, clean up your room. I mean, that's pretty good advice. But there are things he said which are just fine. But yes, I think he probably had overstepped the mark a little bit, and perhaps even bought into his own propaganda a little bit, and assumed he was a bit of an authority in all of these subjects, and he wasn't. And I think some people on the left were a little bit surprised when we were criticising him. Actually, I noticed some of his opponents on the left.
Yeah.
And I made the point to some of them that we didn't think he really knew what he was talking about.
Well, yeah. I mean, because he wasn't doing a talk on it. He was just kind of speaking spontaneously. He was just talking about some archetypal matters, I believe, and it's a different subject altogether as to whether his view on archetypes are limited. It's a completely different subject. But he just kind of all of a sudden started talking about witch hunts, right? And then kind of immediately delved into his idea of the men going their own way. And it's always funny. It's always an online group to those critics. It's always just an online group that there's many of, but they don't know how much they're of. And right, it was really myopic. It was basically, he was talking about witch hunts, but he seemed to be kind of witch hunting men going their own way anyway. So
that's pretty ironic, really, isn't it? Exactly. And I do think that certainly a lot of people, not necessarily just Jordan Peterson, but a lot of other people will read about MGTOW and men's rights and so forth and not go to the actual sites and look at it. They'll read third-party sources and draw their information from that and end up with a really distorted view, which I think is probably what Peterson had done in that case.
Of course.
Yes. So the incident I was talking about or thinking about was when he had an interview with a British journalist. It's the one with the lobsters became very famous out of the interview.
Kathy Newman?
Thank you, Kathy Newman. That's right. It sounds right. Anyway, so there was some claim that his followers were attacking her online. In actual fact, there was actually an analysis done of tweets and he actually got a lot more attacks than she did. But he told his followers to stop doing it. And that just caused the SJWs to just riled up the SJWs, and they attacked more. And so he was telling his followers to back off, and the SJWs just got inflamed and attacked. And we knew that would happen. So that again showed his inexperience. You do never back down with SJWs, never back down, because if you give them an inch, they will just see blood and they'll attack. Excuse my mixed metaphor. So. That's what they're like, and he learned that, and he never did it again. But we saw it. It was like watching a car accident in slow motion. We could see exactly what was going to happen because we know what happens if you say something like this to people and apologize at all or anything along those lines. They will just attack, and that's what happened.
Now, I'm going to do an unusual thing, play devil's advocate here. Are we being unfair to Peterson?
To Peterson?
the apology about MGTOW, how it's not good enough, that kind of thing. Because I seem to be on his ass all the time about this kind of stuff.
So yeah, I'm probably. I had a conversation with somebody else about Jordan Peterson recently, and I'll kind of, without saying what particularly what we were talking about, I cited a number of other people as examples. So there are a lot of people in this category. In fact, I'm thinking we need a name for these people. Actually, this category. Jordan Peterson, Gad Saad, several Australian politicians, Mark Latham, who we've had at ICMI, Pauline Hanson, excuse me, she's a current serving Australian senator. There's a few other people along those lines. You probably haven't heard of Pauline Hanson, or may not have heard of Mark Latham. He was he attended. He spoke at an ICMI, the one in Australia, in 2017. Now, all of these, Milo Yiannopoulos is another one. All of these people, people think, well, they have almost nothing in common. What they do is they do occasionally mention men's issues, right? And they do occasionally talk about them and make legitimate comments about them, but they say a whole bunch of other stuff, and they're often kind of gynocentric actually too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And right. And so these people, they're not MRAs. They're not even. They are. A lot of them are anti-feminist. They're not MRAs. They're not even MRA friendly in a lot of cases. They do legitimately talk about men's issues. But what I'm getting at is a sort of long-winded way of saying that I applaud these people when they raise men's issues, but that doesn't mean I agree with them on other topics. Pauline Hanson is a pretty contentious politician here in Australia. She has made some valid points. She's raised men's issues on a number of occasions. She's pretty much the only one who ever does it in the Senate, in the Australian Senate. But she has raised some other issues I think she's made legitimate points about. She also said some completely what I would describe as outlandish things. But when she raises men's issues, I'm more than really applaud her for that. And so there's a lot of these people like that, and they're often a bit gynocentric. And I've been of the opinion for many years that they're more likely to sort of spread the message than we are. That we're the ones sort of getting the data and talking about this stuff, and they'll pick up information from us, never acknowledge it, and disseminate it to a wider audience.
Exactly. I mean, there's a big part of me that says that that's not very fair. Like, give credit where credit is due, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that'd be nice, but yeah. I resigned myself to the fact a number of years ago that I would like to think that in the future historians are going to look back and say, you know what, these guys did something really good. They went out there and they talked truth to power. That's a statement that a lot of people misuse. Feminists particularly love using it. They are the establishment now. Mm-hmm. We're the ones talking truth to power. Mm-hmm. And I think I'd like to think in 100 years' time, historians will see what we did and will give us the credit that's due after our time, unfortunately. But for the moment, I think we're more likely to just have to accept that that these people will simultaneously criticize us and also repeat things that we've said.
Right, exactly. And you know me, I'm pretty ruthless in terms of my criticism to those who are. It's kind of verboten to actually criticize, because I've criticized basically all those people. Well, I don't know about the Australian politicians because it's just not up to date on them, but. Yeah.
No doubt you would if it was appropriate.
Yeah, right, sure. But my point is, I still think just because they got a few things right and they may be reaching a wider audience doesn't mean that, where I should call them out, I'll stay silent. Else, I won't be talking about Matt Walsh. I won't be talking about Ben Shapiro, Peterson himself. I know there was some rightful criticism of Milo before because he had some weird article about, cutting infant genitalia because that's the kind of dick he preferred, and
he's pro-circ. Milo Yiannopoulos is pro-circumcision. Exactly.
Yeah, right.
So while he talks about men's issues, that's off the table as far as he's concerned. Apparently, I mean, right. he's often a provocateur, but I think in that case he was quite genuine about his beliefs.
And that's why I kind of want to make this a litmus test. This is something you can't claim to be about men's issues and leave something like that out, or be on the opposite side of things. Because I know people like Barbara Kay went out and said that they were pro circumcision. So that's kind of very
Yes, Barbara Kay is another good example, actually. This exact situation of the people who have raised men's issues legitimately, but then are pro-circ and also gynocentric to a large degree.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, you know, I don't want to be, presumptuous here, but, like, that's what I really want to do, is to bring out these kinds of things that nobody really wanted to talk about. Right. Because I guess we're kind of more pressured to, keep some people around as an ally, the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of a deal, which I never believed in. I never gelled with that, let's just say. Right. Yeah. But speaking of, this actually kind of brings up an interesting point in terms of like people who bring up men's issues but aren't MRAs. So did you by chance watch Tucker Carlson's End of Men?
I haven't seen it yet. I'm going to, but I haven't seen it yet. So please go on.
Okay. I did see it. So, it's on Gab TV. You don't have to have an account. You can actually watch it, but, you can't comment, like, or dislike it unless you have a Gab TV account. You can have, but all right. So, in our conversations, I noticed people were joking about ball tanning devices, right? And I just thought it was just some nonsense that people just brought up just to laugh about the exaggeration of certain kind of bro things. But I turn on the End of Men, and it's one of the first things that comes up is ball tanning. And so most of the documentary has a lot to do with aside from fitness, it has to do with diet, and it talks a lot about. It actually did talk about raw egg eating and such. And right, yeah, and it was basically just saying that men in the United States and so forth are terribly out of shape, and they're all fat, and it's the stuff we eat. It's the stuff that gets smuggled into our food supply, that sort of thing. And and the documentary itself shows a lot of exaggerated examples, like kind of out of nowhere, kind of like,
extreme examples.
Exactly right. Yeah. And they unironically use the term bro science.
Okay.
Right. Like I did not expect that. Yes. Right. So, like here's the thing, guys. Like, fitness is a fine thing, Goodness knows I could be in better shape myself. And I'm hoping to be more active, But we're kind of distilling what manhood is into these kind of really specific ways of being man, I think.
Yes.
And
yes.
On the documentary, there was also the appeal to service to others instead of living towards one's own end. So it's kind of the opposite of MGTOW, right? Yeah. And they did, in fact, use the women are affected too kind of angle. Yeah. It was, I just thought it was really, it was pandering to a certain limited archetype of malehood, I think. Just this whole, right. And here's the problem I have with words like bro, because, I know some good people use it, and, I don't mind it when they do it, but it's kind of really sneaky. It's like, if somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, bro," something like that, we're kind of already implying a bit of familiarity between each other.
Yes.
And that hey, you want to be a bro and help me out, dude? Kind of really really sneaky.
Might be expecting to ask for something immediately after that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. Those are my first impressions of watching it. I might do a review of it on Voice for Men, maybe.
Yeah. No, please do. There's certainly an aspect, a side of traditionalism that's growing at the moment, which focuses on certainly healthy diets and exercise, which is absolutely good. Mm-hmm. But yes, they do seem to focus on a particular form of masculinity, whereas we're talking more about men being able to choose their own path and decide what they want. So if you want to go to the gym and do that, that's great. But if you don't want to do that, if that's not you and you're a nerd and you want to sit in front of the computer all the time, that's okay as well. The men shouldn't have to match any particular expectation.
Exactly. Vincent Van Gogh, all those artists, they were just absolute pussies because, they didn't chug raw eggs. And, they didn't
Exactly.
weights,
That's right. They
uh,
couldn't bench press anybody.
right. Yeah. Michelangelo, painting all those dudes. What was he, a homo or something? Stuff like that.
Exactly. That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yes, that's fundamental to men's rights. The idea that it's about men, about self-determinism, about men being able to self-determination, about men being able to live the life they want to live, and releasing them from a lot of those societal obligations that all societies have expected of them. Exactly. That's why I often say it's a third way. Our opponents, who are typically on the left, tend to assume we're on the right, but we're not. In fact, we're actually really in a very centrist position in many ways. In fact, if anything, and I've said this before, in some ways, if I had to describe men's rights, I don't think it's a perfect analogy, but if any, in a certain sense, it's applied libertarianism.
Exactly.
I think, and it does certainly attract libertarians for this reason.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But that's right.
Yeah, exactly. Like sadly, not most libertarians aren't, but MRAs, a lot of them tend to be libertarians.
That's right. Now, when we did the March for Men, I've mentioned in Australia, Sydney Watson organised it. Now, she was really the face of the event, as also Avi Yemeni, who's also a well-known figure in Australia. He was sort of the other well-known figure who was involved, but a lot of the legwork was done by the Liberal Democratic Party of Australia, that is none other than Australia's Libertarian Party.
Okay, so let me kind of bring something up here. We were just talking about women in power before, and this kind of ties into things like women being the faces of things, just to get anywhere. So I wonder, so with all due respect to the fact that you actually enjoyed your time during the March of Men, do you think that kind of applies there, sort of?
Absolutely, I do. In fact, Clementine Ford, who's a well-known Australian feminist, she actually has apparently been fairly quiet for quite a while. This is going back to when she was being a lot more vocal about these things. Yeah. But she actually basically had a go at the march and Sydney were basically saying it took a woman to organise an event for men, to which we said, exactly. This was, yes, right. We recognise this, and this is part of the problem. It took a woman of Sydney's knowledge, stature and so forth in the community to get enough recognition to get this thing together. Yes, absolutely. And she was acting like it was some sort of criticism of us. Actually, this is part of the problem.
Yeah, exactly. We're trying to address that, right? Yeah,
that's right, exactly.
Right.
That's right. And she didn't get that, so that's right.
Okay. Oh, by the way, so we're on the subject of Sydney Watson, right? So she's made the news recently, apparently, because she complained about being sandwiched between two fat people on an American Airlines plane.
Oh, I missed that. Please do tell.
Well, no. This is something I saw on Twitter. She was kind of like live tweeting how she was, being sandwiched between these two fat people. I think she was coming out of Australia, not in. I think there was some event in Australia that she was a part of, but she was really complaining on Twitter and everything like that, right? And it's not that I think she was in the wrong here necessarily. And and where I'm getting at with this is that she actually made the news for it, right? There's a story that says American Airlines passenger complains after being sandwiched between two obese people for nearly 3 hours, and says people who need seatbelt extenders are too fat to fly. But airline says our passengers come in all shapes and sizes, because that was the airline's response, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And the article recognized that it was an Australian American conservative political commentator, Sydney Watson, right?
Sydney Watson.
Okay,
right.
So I get the whole obesity thing, right? It's they're trying to kind of make this thing completely normalized and everything like that. But here's my kind of nitpick here. Imagine if this was a man complaining, famous or not.
Yes. It would most likely be a different situation. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. It just came across like, Sydney Watson, she wasn't wrong, but she seemed really entitled to be kind of, getting all speaking constantly about this thing, and have a lot of people come to her support. No, yes, Sydney, I agree with you. We love you. Yes, slay girl, queen, etc.
Sydney's probably at least got the self-awareness, I guess, to probably realize that a lot of feminists will do it and not even realize that they've got that privilege. I guess Sydney at least probably knows that she's got that privilege.
Right. Yeah. Well, imagine if it was Jordan Peterson, or imagine if it was Milo Yiannopoulos. It's like you get what I mean.
Yes, I do actually, and you're right. In today's society, it would absolutely be a different situation for them. Yes. So for those who don't know, Sydney Watson, bit of a funny story actually. So Sydney Watson and Avi Yemeni tried to go to the US together for an event, and American Customs and Border Protection apparently tried to turn them both away. Now, Avi's an Australian citizen. He's a dual Australian-Israeli citizen, but he was traveling on his Australian passport, and he was turned away from the United States. And I think they were a bit shocked. Sydney's a US citizen.
Yeah.
So I think she said at one point she thought that they were a bit shocked by this, and they thought they were planning to put her on a plane, and they couldn't. So she was kept at the airport for a while and eventually let into the country, as is her right. So anyway, but poor old Avi was returned to Australia. But yeah, so apparently they didn't know she was a US citizen, and it appears fully expecting to turn her around. Exactly.
Well, there's another thing I kind of want to nitpick, and I was going to do a video on this one, but I'm not going to really have the time, so I might as well talk about it here. So I looked into some podcast things she did with another Australian, I think Daisy Cousins, I think it is. And they were kind of talking about the whole March for Men thing. And Sydney Watson was saying that, well, ever since then, she was kind of more understanding of the feminist position, that kind of stuff like that. So that was kind of weird for me. Like, like after you did something like the March for Men, how could you really kind of go back to that knowing full well what you know? But she made a really strange comment that I kind of want your thoughts on. Australia, sorry, let me rephrase it. America is far less gynocentrist than Australia.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I'm aware of that. So I haven't watched the video in question. For the record, I spoke at the March for Men. I've met Daisy and Sydney personally.
Okay, you met both of them.
I've met both of them. So Daisy was at ICMI 17. Okay. And Sydney, of course, was an organizer for the March for Men. So I spoke to her a number of times online and then met her on the day of the event. Sydney and Daisy and another woman by the name of Lauren Southern, who's a Canadian woman now residing in Australia. All three of them made some comments about the manosphere. And they're all quite critical of the manosphere on Twitter. I've written a response to that,
and I made a video too.
That's right, thank you. And you made a video, exactly. So I was quite disappointed at the things that all three of them said, quite frankly, particularly given that I've met Daisy and talked to her, and a number of we met on the day of one of the days of ICMI, and I've talked to her a bunch online, and same with Sydney. And so I guess at a personal level, I was a little bit disappointed by that. Anyway, I made a comment on it. I wrote an article about that in my which is a response. But in any case, I was surprised, given that they both had exposure to the men's rights movement, that they would say that they said those things. Lauren, I probably wasn't as surprised by that, or by the things she said. And anyway, there it is. So. Getting back to your question, so about whether she said that Australia is more gynocentric than the US.
That's what Sydney Watson.
That's what Sydney Watson said, exactly. Yeah, right. So my view on it, I've lived in Canada. I lived 45 minutes from the US border, so I used to go to the US quite a lot. I mean, hell, it's Canada. Everybody lives 45 minutes from the US border, right? Right. Anyway, and of course, obviously, most of my life in Australia, I think that each of the developed countries is gynocentric in a little bit of a different way. I'm not sure that I would quantify it in that manner. So I've often said that Toronto and Melbourne being a city in Australia, Melbourne and Toronto fight it out as SJW capital of the world. That's been my comment. So parts of Australia certainly very gynocentric. Now, Australia, like the US, we have states in Australia. They don't vary as much as US states, actually. But having said that, Victoria, the state of my birth, is definitely the most gynocentric state in Australia. The state I live in, Queensland, is probably the least gynocentric state in Australia. Queensland is a little more conservative, so it's gynocentric. It's the gynocentrism that appears is probably a more conservative form, but nevertheless, it has less of those problems. And New South Wales, Sydney actually is from Melbourne as well. She spent I don't know if she was born down there or what, but she lived down there for a long time. So she lived in the Melbourne area as well. So we're both quite familiar with Melbourne. That's the state I was born in. It's where the March for Men was, and that is the most gynocentric state in Australia. So actually, the little bit of a light bulb just went on. I didn't think of this before. Yeah. Probably most of her experience of Australia is probably the state of Victoria, and if that's where she spent most of her time, then I'm probably not surprised she said that, actually.
Okay.
So so you know what? I didn't think of that before, but that's probably what's going on. So if as I said, I think the US varies a lot. Australia varies, but not quite as much. I would suggest that Sydney might want to come and spend some more time in Queensland, and she might find things a little bit different. We certainly have our own problems here in that regard, but they're not as bad in many ways as Victoria, as the state of Victoria. Yeah. Yep. So there you go. That's, I think, what's going on. I suspect it's probably reflecting her experience of Australia.
Yeah, exactly. Like what I'm thinking about is, I'm still, not over the fact that America in general may be the most gynocentric place on the planet. That's in terms of what I'm trying to think here.
So as I said, I think my perception is it varies. I mean, I've been to a few states quite a bit, and other states not as much. But my sense is that it varies quite a lot. I don't know what your thoughts are, how many states you've lived into and been to. But as I said, I think the way it ends up being applied differs from country to country. So, for example, the US has selective service, which is still only for men, despite overwhelming evidence. I mean, you may well know this, but perhaps viewers don't. There was a challenge to selective service way back in the early 1980s, and it was defeated on the basis at the time. The court ruled, I think it was the Supreme Court ruled, that the selective service would stay in place because women were not allowed to be in every area in the military. They could not do every job in the military. Therefore, there was a differentiation. That's why selective service would be male only. I don't actually agree with that logic, but that was the logic they had. But as of 2015, that's not the case anymore. I think it was 2015 when they finally normalised it so that women can be in every role in the US military. So if that's the case, then that defeats the original argument against selective service. And I think so. The NCFM have brought court cases in relation to selective service, of course, and won some victories. But I think that the argument was, since the original 1982 or early 1980 judgment was no longer valid, it ought to be the case that selective service would be across the board. And yet here you are 7 years later, and selective service is still male only. So that's certainly gynocentric. We don't have anything equivalent because there's nothing like a draft or selective service here in Australia. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, I do think that in other ways we've had. In the UK a couple of years ago, there was a call for a curfew for men, and it made worldwide news. Well, in actual fact, we Australian feminists were calling for a curfew for men several years earlier than that, and it got some media exposure, but not as much. In Australia, we've had people claim. We had one particular academic who goes by the name Red Ruby Rose, or something along those lines. Her name is, and she wanted Father's Day to be replaced with Special Persons Day.
Oh, wow.
So we've got. I think it manifests in different ways. That's my feeling about it.
Right. Yeah. Because when I talk about gynocentrism, I don't mean just the institutionalized ones like the grab. I'm talking about casual attitudes,
like social. Yes, that's a good point.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're still trying to do this whole chivalry thing. Well, I guess that's true in just about any westernized kind of country, like UK, Australia. Europe, what have you. But then there's things like where was I going? Oh yeah, Roe versus Wade, because that was, I think that whole abortion thing is a very gynocentric phenomenon. I think because it's it's very zeroing in on some notion which in itself is subject to criticism, notion of female autonomy, that they won't even think of defending this hard if something equivalent were applicable to men and such, because it's this whole abortion legislation thing, and the backlash from repealing the Roe versus Wade thing a short while back. It says that basically men have to pay right into it, even though they have nothing to do with it, because everything is men's fault. And that women get pregnant and everything like that. Men are the ones that ultimately have to bear this responsibility. It's a gynocentric attitude, and right. And I've even heard I won't name names. Some MRAs say that if we care about bodily autonomy, if we care about the genital autonomy of children and stuff like that, we need to protect abortion rights too. But the problem is, it's an appeal to siphoning men's money to pay for these operations, because the market apparently doesn't stand it. Else, why would there be such legislation to have the abortions in the first place? And so I'm kind of really scatterbrained, kind of going off completely on this one, but I think you get my point.
Yeah. So I just want to say you make a really good point about social gynocentrism, actually. And I was trying to think of a good counterexample for the US, because I mentioned a few examples where Australia was gynocentric, and I mentioned selective service. But I think you're absolutely right. The chivalry is definitely a bigger problem, certainly in the parts of the US I've been, than it is in Australia. There are ways in which Australian culture has become quite gender neutral. A good example of this is actually parents' rooms. So I hear a lot of people in different countries complain about men not being able to, that say having women's bathrooms having changing tables and men's not, and so forth. Australia has had gender neutral parents' rooms probably since I was a kid. So the idea that a dad will be able to go into the parents' room and change the diaper and whatnot, that's something that's been normal in Australia for a long time. So there's an area where there's a respect for the men being able to look after the kids and so forth, which, by the way, despite what feminists claim, is something that men historically did do. So this idea that men weren't involved in child rearing is just not true. If you look, the only time I think there was an exception was at the start with the Industrial Revolution, where men then started to have to travel more for work and so forth, but they didn't have that time to do that. But prior to that, people lived where they worked for the most part, and both parents, and looked after kids, as did older siblings. So
okay, yeah, all right, yeah. Sorry, I'm just thinking about another thing that Lawrence Southern once said. Since we've been on, we're really like bare knuckle fist fighting these people right now, verbally. But so it's just, there was a long time ago, before even those manosphere remarks, in which Lawrence Southern actually said something on Twitter about, is it sexist if I don't want to have men run a daycare or care for children at all? Because with the implication being that men are by design predators, and or otherwise cannot handle children. So
I'm going to respond to that as a parent. Okay? Right. And I'll tell you something about my daughter's upbringing. Nobody who wasn't an immediate family member ever looked after my daughter when she was a child, right? And that was a personal choice we made, right? So it's not that it's not, so some people like Lawrence Southern would argue that their children are safe with women, but not with men. Okay. The reality is, in our case, we made the decision that we weren't going to entrust our child to anybody. It wasn't about gender, right? And this is the key. There are plenty of examples. Yes, a man in that role could harm the children, but there are plenty of examples where women do too. And this is something that does tend to get suppressed, even though there are a lot of women who harm children. It doesn't get into the media a lot. Yep. There's strong evidence that it's actually more likely to occur than men harming children. Now, they argue that perhaps with some validity, that women have more exposure to children, and that's the reason why their numbers come up more and so forth. But the reality is there are a lot of women who harm children. So my view as a parent is that whether or not I entrust my child to somebody doesn't have anything to do with their gender, right? It has to do with whether I'm comfortable with those people caring for my child. In our particular case, we never had, I guess if it really came down to it, we might have had to have used a babysitter or daycare or whatever it is. As it happened, we didn't. And the only people who ever cared for our daughter were my wife and I, or one of her close relatives. So that's the way it happened with us. But it wasn't about gender for me. It really wasn't. I wouldn't feel comfortable with, in general, with other people I don't know looking after my child, but that has nothing to do with their gender. So,
exactly, yeah. Speaking of dangerous women, women who are dangerous to children, there's this Lucy Letby case. It's a hospital nurse accused of murdering 7 babies.
Yes, and attempting to murder another 10.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, she's currently undergoing trial. That's the allegation. So, one of the children who died, and this is one of she's being charged with this child's murder. The mother actually interrupted her and has actually given evidence to say what she was doing. Unfortunately, the mother didn't realize what she was doing was harmful to her own child, and the child ended up dying again.
Yeah,
that's an allegation at the moment. Yeah, that's an allegation at the moment. But she's undergoing trial in the UK at the moment. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So basically, women aren't angels.
No, absolutely.
We need to drop this attitude immediately. It's a very
that's the problem. Exactly, that's right. Whereas Lauren Southern is basically saying she trusts women but not men with her child, and I would say that's ill-advised. That both men and women could be a danger to that child. Sure, most won't be. Most daycare workers will just be doing their job, and there's no problem. But there will be both. There could be male or female workers there, daycare workers who could either be a risk to the child. In this case, as you're saying, this is an allegation against a neonatal nurse. This is newborn children. She's charged with caring for, and the allegation is that she has murdered 7 of them and attempted to murder another 10.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So yes, just to reiterating, for me, it wasn't about gender. I think that's what we need to get across to society. Women are not angels, and there's certainly plenty of data that shows that women harm children at a higher rate than men. And I think there needs to be societal recognition of this. And it's unfortunate that we have to keep raising these sort of topics, but as long as the Women Are Wonderful effect continues to go on, we're going to keep speaking truth to power.
Exactly.
So I was going to mention one thing about abortion. So I must admit I was a little surprised when Roe versus Wade was overturned. I really thought that was I thought that was politically untenable in the US. I actually thought that even though there might have been plenty of people who wanted to overturn it, I didn't think they'd be able to get it passed. Right. So I was surprised by that. I don't know what your thoughts on that were, but
well, it was just like the whole Johnny Depp verdict. I was just surprised it happened.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. And I was and at the time I was kind of more freshly coming around more to the anti-abortion side anyway. Yeah. So it was interesting. It was an interesting time for me to kind of really see this kind of unravel here. So
So there's a hypothesis, and this is something that I think feminists are going to have to think about in the future. It's only a hypothesis, but there's a hypothesis that when societies come under demographic pressure, that they will become anti-abortion. Now, I've heard this proposed actually in terms of ancient Judea, where you had the ancient tribes in Israel being a small group surrounded by potentially hostile neighbors, and the ancient Israelites and Judeans were sexually more conservative than a lot of their neighbors. And I've actually heard this, and this comes through Judaism, Christianity, and so forth. But this has been, I've heard it argued that the reason that they were sexually more conservative was because they were under demographic pressure. Now, Western civilization is now under demographic pressure. is this the reason that Roe versus Wade has been overturned? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. So if this is the case, and it really is what's going on, then we're going to see a lot more of this.
Exactly, because it's basically an indication that there never was more wide support for this sort of thing than we really expected. Because we really thought that we were made to think anyway that this is what abortion rights I'm talking about is what women seem to want. But I just got to thinking about of the marketplace, I suppose, of medicine, and it's a bit of a involved subject. But if it just doesn't. Something like Roe versus Wade would kind of really come into place if there wasn't really a marketplace to do it, or there's some kind of question about ethics to begin with. So they instituted Roe versus Wade, and basically kind of bypassed it and just say that if you don't support this, you're oppressing women. So right. So basically, it was a way to kind of completely bypass and kind of obfuscate what people really seem to want out of this.
But it sounds like you're arguing there may be an economic angle to it. Is that right?
Somewhat, yes. And I'm talking about, and with economic, you can't really escape the moral question also, because what it means when people vote with their wallet, so to speak. They're usually voting their own conscience on that one. So I don't think morals are separate from that.
No, that's true, and there can be. That's right. There's an amount of money that people are probably prepared to put, depending on how strongly they feel about something. There will be an amount of money that they're prepared to sort of spend to maintain their moral position. Then, depending if it's something they don't feel too strongly about, then eventually they'll reach a point where they'll go ahead and purchase it anyway. But there'll be subjects where they feel so strongly about it that they won't exercise that at any price. But that's it's interesting, the moral aspect there in terms of as I said too about excuse me, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Sorry, it's just after midnight here, and I was probably getting a little tired.
That's okay.
But yes, but no, it was interesting. Really surprised that I said before that it had passed. And you're probably right that we were led to believe that support for it was greater than was actually the case in the community. Exactly. And of course, this does only leave it to the states, which is another point I made, that that at that point, some states immediately legislated, or if they didn't already have legislation in place, they made sure there was legislation in place for allowing abortion. Whereas other states, this also surprised me, other states already had legislation that basically triggered as soon as Roe versus Wade was overturned, and abortion became illegal, which I actually, again, was a little surprised at that. I thought there was more social support in the US than it seems there was for it.
Exactly. Now, I wish there was as less social support for something like MGM than there is abortion, by the way, because there's this idea going around that profit in itself is the driving force for the MGM industry, but I have some responses to that, because it's more like a reflection of the people's mindset. They might be either deceived, or they really have this kind of hatred for males and infant male genitalia and such, and want to see it completely mitigated. It's a response to that vast mindset. So if we're successful in persuading all these people to stop doing such a thing, and really combat the immorality of this thing, ironically, people always blame capitalism for this one, but capitalism could save the babies, because we can make this completely unprofitable. And
yes. Oh, right. Yeah. So if you can discourage enough people from essentially selling, as it were, you can starve the market. Yes. Right. Okay. Yes.
Now, what happens next is going to be interesting, because because America is the only place in which this is so normal. People think we have to do it. Religion or not, we have to do this.
Outside of the Middle East and Africa. True.
That's true.
Yeah.
Right. But it's an interesting case in the United States, because if circumcision starts to fail, as it should, under the capitalist system, what is it they're not? So I'm actually worried that there might be a Roe versus Wade for circumcisions.
You mean that in terms of the Supreme Court would make a ruling? You mean?
I think so.
Oh,
I think yes.
right.
See, this is very tinfoil hat of me. I admit it. This is really tinfoil hat of me. But it's like but I think that support is still not sufficiently low enough. People still support it just enough that if it becomes unprofitable, it'll start making it mandatory through other ways, and that's what I'm very worried about. I think people are going to hate me for this, for saying such a thing.
That would be horrifying, and I do think you'd see. Well, I don't know. I mean, there's a proportion of the U.S. population that are anti-circumcision, of course, and I suspect, and there would certainly be a proportion who would probably object to it being mandatory. That would be a very serious situation, actually. But for those who don't know,
I was just actually going to say, do I sound nuts here?
Hopefully it never comes to that. I don't think it's impossible. It would be an extreme step for the US government to take. But bear in mind, though, there was a case of a 5-year-old boy in Florida. The mother and the father wanted the boy circumcised. The mother didn't really care either way. When the baby was born, she signed an agreement saying that he would be circumcised. One reason or another, it never happened, and they separated. And then he went to court over this when the boy was 4. And by the time the court case had settled, the boy was 5. And it was found that there was a circumcision going to be ordered for him to be undergoing a circumcision, even though he was now old enough to understand the procedure, or that part of his body would be removed, and he verbalized no. And his mother fled with him, and intactivists in Florida and other states actually kept her underground for a while, but they did actually eventually catch up with them. And all the evidence suggests that, although they've never publicly stated it, it appears that the circumcision was done to the young boy. Now, I should know his name. I wrote an article on him a few years ago for Rookie for Men. I do have the information there. But anyway, this poor young boy had the circumcision done at age 5, even though he understood this and wanted it not to be done.
Right.
So I've often made the point that so the only people in our society who don't have a protection from unnecessary medical procedures are infant boys, right? So we don't know what age that they gain that protection in Australia. In the US, we do know they still don't have that protection at age 5 because it was done. So the American courts will order a boy of age 5 to have an unnecessary medical procedure performed against the will of the child and against the will of one of their parents. Now, where does that end? What if they found him at 10 or 15? Right. At exactly what age would they have been prepared? Would they have to strap him down on a table? We don't know. We don't know how far the American courts were prepared to go. Perhaps if he fights back to the point where they need hospital security to do it, maybe they would have backed down. Who knows? But because he was a 5-year-old child, they went ahead with the procedure. So I don't know. So to give you an example, we know they've done this to a 5-year-old child. So what would they? Would they do it against the parents' wishes to infants? They quite possibly.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So going back more onto to really kind of hypothetically using capitalism to save the babies, so to speak. I think, and using the marketplace rather. I think it would really serve to promote the greatness of the intact genitalia. I think the wonder of it, and I think, and I wish more energy was spent towards that instead of. There are some people saying that if you're just going to do it voluntary, that's totally okay. But and in a political sense, this is true. But I think that more esteem should be restored towards the intact.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is a cultural aspect too. Getting back to the difference with the US, it's really interesting. The apart from parts of the Middle East and Africa, where it's generally coming from a religious aspect, in the US there isn't that religious aspect there, and it's the only Western country where it is really common. Although I understand not a Western country, of course, but I understand it's become more common in South Korea. I think we talked about this previously because of American influence.
I think so.
Yeah. So, but otherwise, now Australia, it used to be more common than it is. In fact, I think the rate in Australia used to be fairly similar to the US. And I wonder if that didn't come from American influence.
We actually discussed this before. It was more post-World War II kind of a deal.
Exactly, that's right. That's where I suspect it came from. But it's been declining for decades to the point where the average, I think it's now below 10% of boys are circumcised here. Yeah. So Mike Buchanan, who's British, argues that it is already, that we don't need to criminalise intact male genital mutilation because it is already unlawful. He's put this to various figures in the British administration, the British government, and so forth, and I think they've all basically, mostly not responded, but essentially the argument is that they reject this idea that it is already unlawful. Now, I was looking just today, actually, at something I had written a few years ago, and I actually uncovered several years ago, I uncovered a little comment that was made by a constitutional expert here, and this barrister had actually argued that it's essentially unlawful here in the state I live in, Queensland. Basically, the wording was something like, in a strict reading of the relevant legislation, circumcision is already illegal, but there's never been a prosecution. So we've got this aspect where the laws, as written, are already saying that it's unlawful, but the state won't do it. The state won't do anything about it. It's almost as if they regard it as customary, I suppose. But I think this is a point we need to look at, where the laws are already saying this is unlawful.
Yeah.
And it's probably the case in many other jurisdictions. I'd be interested to know, even in US jurisdictions, are there any laws that say it's okay to circumcise boys? I would suggest probably there aren't any such laws.
Exactly.
It's just customary. It's just tolerated.
Right, sure. Well, maybe somebody should tell that to the anti-child trans surgery people, because they're calling for the banning, and of course, accept male genital mutilation. That's what they're saying. But why don't they take on this angle? Is it just grandstanding and trying to get it to ban it, or is it just getting them to recognize this is illegal to begin with?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly. It's already very likely unlawful in every jurisdiction. But yes, we have this tolerance of something that we shouldn't have a tolerance of, and that goes for gender transitioning of children as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
And most intactivists are against the gender transitioning of children.
Right. Because that's what it's all about, right? The autonomy of a child to stay intact, and
yes.
If they're really wanting to do it, wait till you're 18.
Exactly. But, that's right.
Yeah, I personally, as an individual, say that the intact body is a wonderful thing. Think really, really hard before you decide to alter it.
That's exactly the position I take. To an adult, I've spoken to adults who've been considering it, and I've said, that is your choice, but I encourage you to research the topic and understand the implications, the fact that to a large degree it is not reversible, and so forth. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
it can only be partly reversed.
Yeah, the political freedom here is twofold, right? You may have the freedom to do so in that political sense. We have the political freedom to persuade you not to do it.
Exactly, that's right. To present arguments. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. And if the person chooses to do it anyway, well, that's their right as an adult to make that choice.
Right. Some of us might call you an idiot.
I think that is a mistake, but it's their choice. That's right.
Yeah.
So we'll present the evidence to adults and encourage them to research, but that's all we can do.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's certainly a lot of people. This, of course, comes back then to cancel culture, because when you talk about transitioning, there are a lot of people who regret transitioning, but there's a lot that they're really shouted down in a lot of cases. I think it's finally, the message is finally breaking through, but I do think there are a lot of people who are cancelled for and shouted down for raising concerns. So again, I know, and I've spoken to people who have transitioned and are very happy with it, and that's the right decision for them. That's fantastic. But I do hope that anybody considering it understands the enormous ramifications of this.
Exactly. And those who have detransitioned, who still think that you can't compare foreskin to your removal organs, you're quite wrong. Right. So, you gotta have to see the irony about this thing, because it's an actual functioning important part that's amputated. It's not just a flap of skin. You probably think it's just a flap of skin, and so you're talking like a complete hypocritical idiot, right?
And it shouldn't be about whether or not something's harmful or not. Bodily autonomy should be absolute.
Sure.
So they make arguments about, which I think we've pretty conclusively shown are wrong. That they say, it's not very important, as you say, the flap of skin is all that. That's not the point. I think those arguments are wrong, but it's still not the point.
Yeah.
It's bodily autonomy should be absolute. Right. Is this procedure medically necessary? And even honest proponents of circumcision will admit that it isn't medically necessary to do the procedure. And since it isn't medically necessary to do the procedure, it shouldn't be done to a child.
Exactly.
Yeah. When that person grows up, if they really want to lose their foreskin, that's the choice they make. Yeah, like we said, I'll encourage them to not do that and to research it, but in the end, it's their choice as an adult.
Yeah, to me, that's the difference between I'm helpless to do anything against it politically versus supporting it. I'm not going to support it one bit if you're an adult.
Yeah, that's right.
I think
it's a mistake. Yeah, that's right. I think certainly in terms of circumcision, I don't think. Yeah, exactly. I don't think there's any good that will come out of that for the individual. But adults. I mean, in many cases, 18 is probably, a lot of people aren't mature at 18, but we have to draw a line somewhere. Our society has decided 18 is adulthood. Well, there it is. That's the line. And,
that's absolutely fair.
Yeah.
All right. Is there anything else you kind of want to touch today? Because we are already going close to the 1.5 hour mark.
Exactly. I think we've done really well, actually. And I think we've covered quite a lot of areas. No, that's great. Thanks so much for another great episode.
Absolutely.
See you in a couple of weeks.
All right. Sure. See you.
Bye-bye.